friends, and welcome to the Radical Emergence podcast, where we're having conversations at the edge of transformation. We are your hosts. I'm Dr. Jen Peer-Rich, and with me is my friend, co-host, and co-collaborator, Dr. Sally Adnams Jones. Please check out our bios in the show notes where you'll find links to our work, websites, and can find ways to connect with us. If you're not already following, hit that subscribe button, ring that bell, and join our mailing list so you can stay up to date on new episodes as they drop.
Hello, everybody. Sally here. This exciting project consists of about 26 episodes in all, dedicated to better defining and understanding transformation on all its levels of reality. That's personal, social, as well as ecological. We're going to ask, what is transformation? Why bother? Why do we need it? And what does it feel like or look like? We'll also ask, can we induce it or perhaps accidentally block it? These are really important questions for growth.
We draw not only on our hard-won life experience, we are also transdisciplinarians. So what the heck is that? Well, it means we want to understand transformation from as many lenses as possible, including formal academic disciplines and discourses, art, media, and popular culture. Importantly, we draw from our living experience.
So we are experts, so to speak, but mostly in just one small but highly critical area, our own suffering, and the medicines that we've both used to transform our own lives. So to this end, we've also added decades of committed practices, as well as formal degrees, including specific in-depth studies in the mechanisms of transformation, because we needed to understand this healing journey for ourselves.
Does this entitle us to help others? You bet. Absolutely. Because it is by sharing our stories, knowledge, and direct experience that we offer sane, sober, practical tools for living on the ground of life. So welcome. Strap in, hang on, and enjoy the ride as we deep dive into a universe of transformation.
Welcome back, everybody, to episode 15. We are over halfway in this year-long conversation about transformation. And we really hope you're enjoying it. We've been getting a lot of great feedback. Thank you so much, everybody who's made the effort to say how much you're enjoying not only the care with which we've researched this topic, but also the accessibility of it. So we really appreciate that. So that was our goal, to go do the homework and then just have a conversation around the kitchen table with you about some of the most important things about being alive. And today is one of those. This is a pretty central concept. We're going to discuss meaning. Complex topic, the meaning of life, as opposed to just the meaning of words. Two different things. So why would we do that? Why would we put that into a dialogue about transformation? Are they connected? Yeah, they're really connected. This is central. And not only is it core, and we'll discuss why, it's part of an ancient lineage of thinking. It's obsessed mankind to try to not only discern and discover, but also create meaning. This has been around since we sat around the fire during our cave days, discussing why are we here? What are we doing? What is it all about? And since then, literally hundreds of philosophers have tried to answer that question. And amongst the greatest were the German philosophers. So that is a legacy that Jen and I are just stepping into. But we're going to make a disclaimer. We're not going to give any answers. We don't claim to have any. We're in this beautiful lineage of meaning making, even by making this podcast. That's what we've been trying to do, is create meaning out of information overload and a bit of chaos in the cultural world. So we do this automatically. That's what humans do. We try to make meaning even when we aren't aware of it. That's pretty much what's driving our values in our life, and our search for love, our search for work, our search for purpose, and our search for connection and belonging. Those are all connected to meaning making. So let's just do a bit of a deep dive. Why would it be transformative? Well, as a therapist, I've spent my life noticing a pattern that whenever there's a meaning collapse in somebody's individual life, there's a lot of suffering. And then when we start to rebuild, there's profound transformation. So collapses of meaning, suffering, loss, pain, sadness, and then rebuilding and transformative meaning making is the critical skill for mental well-being. Let's just put it that way. So meaning making resides in every individual. It lives within us, and we've noticed this pattern that 2 or 3 times in a human's life, it is quite normal, especially at midlife, to have a collapse of meaning. When we reassess everything, what are we here for? What are our values? What are we working for? What is love? What is work? What is purpose? What is creativity? What is the meaning of life? So we get these reassessments thrown at us every now and again in every individual's life. This is normal. It's also darn painful. But if you see it as a pattern, you're equipped to deal with it. And we've noticed that when you can rebuild meaning, it's an enormous strength. That's what builds resilience. That's what Viktor Frankl, who wrote the little book, the beautiful book that sold millions of copies, wrote about. He was a psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps, wrote a whole book because he noticed that those who can find meaning in even the darkest hours are the ones that survive, adapt, and are resilient. So it's critical to transformation. But that's a fractal. The individual is a fractal of the collective. So just as in individuals' lives, there's collapses and reconstruction, deconstruction, reconstruction, wave patterns. It happens collectively too. And right now in our collective culture, there's a meaning collapse, which is quite normal. There's a lot of people out there saying existential risk, we're all going to die, there's a collapse of meaning, a crisis. However, this is the normal prerequisite for profound transformation. We have to deconstruct the old meanings and reconstruct new ones. So just in epochal terms, we did the postmodern thing for several decades now. We deconstructed everything. Nietzsche said, God is dead. He meant by that all our old belief systems and our reliance on an external God, which gave us meaning, has been deconstructed. So the question is, what's next? This is the beginning of metamodernism, when we start to reconstruct new meanings. We'll talk about that in a minute. All I wanted to say is that as in the individual, so in the collective, it's a pattern. And I would like to point to other people who have gone into this extensively. Jen and I are just giving an overview. Somebody like John Vervaeke, a Canadian professor, has done a fabulous job on YouTube. You can find his 50 episodes or something of actually tracking how we've made meaning as a species, from the fires in the cave right up to high-rise tenements where we're still trying to make meaning. What has happened? How did the brain change? How did it develop? Multiple disciplines have looked at this issue, from philosophy to psychology to cognitive science. Jen and I are generalists. We're just going to point you to other people who are experts, and I'm going to refer a lot to Iain McGilchrist, the psychiatrist who's looked at the left and right brain hemisphere and how those make meaning in different ways. There are different ways of making meaning. So I would just like to say that with every collapse of meaning, whether it's in the individual or the collective, period of dark night of the soul, then comes reconstruction. So it's reassuring. This episode is deeply reassuring when you notice patterns, and they're fractals. We're living in a field of transformation. And every now and again that reorganizes, deconstructs, and reconstructs. And I'm excited to hand over to Jen now and hear what she has to say about the individual and collective fields of transformation and meaning making.
It is so good to be here with you all again. And yeah, I love how you have set us up to understand, Sally, that meaning is meant to collapse. We're meant to have these meaning crises in our life, that's a natural thing. It's a part of our development. And if we can kind of normalize that, wow, it would be such a different world. And if we could step forward and support each other through those natural collapses of meaning, wow, it would be a much different world. So it's really good to be here with you all on the Radical Emergence podcast. And of course, I'm really glad and grateful to be here with my dear friend and co-host, Dr. Sally. It is a delight to talk about one of our most favorite topics in the world. We are transformation nerds through and through. We want to explore in this podcast how we can recognize ourselves as these fields of transformation within these larger fields of transformation. Basically, we're like immersed in this perpetually transformative cosmic soup. And I think that's amazing that we can have an entire podcast about that. So I'm glad you're here. Creating meaning is so, so very important. It gives us a sense of well-being, a sense of happiness, a sense of purpose, and meaning making allows us opportunities to grow. It gives us the frameworks that we need to live in this world that is really increasingly complex. And of course, we want to say right at the top that meaning making is going to be different for all of us, because we all have different experiences, right? So it's going to be different. Our viewpoints are different. So how we will create meaning and what we will find meaningful will be different between us. But what we share, many of us, is that this is a time of crisis on a lot of different levels. But our friend Adam Wright on our weekly Clubhouse call recently reminded us that, it's a crisis, but also a time ripe with a lot of opportunities. And there are opportunities that arise in crisis. So on this episode, while we are looking at meaning and we're looking at this thing called the meaning crisis, we also want to put a strong focus on the opportunities that are arising out of the crisis. Because we are living in this time of epic change, epic transformation. In a month of technological and social transformation in 2023 is like a year of social and technological transformation in 2003. In just 20 years, we've seen such rapid development, and it's really hard to keep up. There's a lot of information, there's a lot of disinformation, and a lot of the things that we've been taught to trust and believe in have become suspect, a little doubtful, sometimes a lot doubtful. And that's a good thing. That is what is generating a lot of this meaning crisis. Also, our survival as a species is uncertain, and there are a lot of different systems collapsing right now. That is contributing to the meaning crisis. So, what we're trying to do on this episode is look at not just how we create meaning in this time of rapid change and transformation, but how do we survive it, and how can we possibly even thrive and create and reimagine a more sustainable world? So we're looking at this episode from 3 different perspectives. We're creating, in this first part, we're talking about how we create personal meaning on a personal level. In the second part, we're talking about how we create collective meaning. And then in the third part, we're going to look at how our individual meaning and collective meaning come together to create a creative synthesis that allows us to heal what we talked about in a previous episode, healing that subject-object split. If you don't know that word, go back and check out that episode about healing the subject-object split. We're healing the tension between inner meaning and outer meaning, so that we can participate in this meaning crisis in conscious and constructive ways. And what Dr. Vervaeke, John Vervaeke, Sally brought forward, what he calls awakening from the meaning crisis. And we can't recommend his podcast enough if you are curious about navigating this meaning crisis and how we can participate consciously in it. If you are having an existential crisis right now and having your own meaning crisis, definitely check out his podcast. And so, we're all experiencing, mental health, mental health issues, increase in suicide, increase of anxiety, increase of loneliness, loss of connection, loss of community, all of these, in addition to the loss of trust that I mentioned earlier, in all of these systems that we thought were kind of unbreakable, like political systems, religious system, educational system, all of the institutions are being questioned right now. And it makes us feel like everything we thought was true is up for grabs. And there's so much change in the air. How do we find stability? How do we find our feet underneath us when the world is literally upside down all the time? And that's what Dr. Vervaeke's work is all about. And on the flip side, he also points us to some of the positive things that are arising out of this meaning crisis, like an increased interest in going to therapy, an increased interest in the self-healing journey and altered states of consciousness, psychedelic medicine, mystical states, flow states, mindfulness practices. All of these return to the traditions and practices that we've talked about on this podcast extensively. All of that helps us reclaim that meaning that we're trying to find in this time of so much tumult. All of these practices, Dr. Vervaeke says, help us come back and create meaning on our own terms. And that is what awakening from the meaning crisis is all about. Because like Sally said, we as a species have been making meaning our whole history. That's what we've been doing on lots of different levels. And because this is a natural breakdown, we now can exist within this breakdown with the tools that we need so that we don't drown in the breakdown. So yeah, I just want to say that it's really important that we become aware of how we are making meaning, because for many of us, the meanings that we create are attached to illusory stories that we have carried from unresolved trauma. We also did a show about that. And so, one very important reason to become really conscious of how we're making meaning on an individual level is because then we can start to spot those stories and the stories that are attached to the meanings that we're giving to the things that are happening to us. It's very difficult to heal those things without being aware of how we're applying meaning to our experience. So, yeah. Also, this kind of existential awakening that happens when you have a meaning crisis is a natural extension of the crisis itself. So while we are in this time of deep crisis, we are also in a time of crisis that is connecting with other crises. And in this multiple impending crisis, we have the opportunity to create meaning in new ways, in ways that have never been seen before. And I think Sally and I feel like that's one of the most exciting things about this time that we're living in, is the opportunity to reimagine meaning and use it in ways that help us heal and grow together. So yeah, I'm going to pass it back to Sally, and we're going to go further into how we are creating meaning collectively. Back to you, Sally.
I think you just pointed to a super important thing, which is that we feel there's a meaning crisis when we feel very disconnected from what gave us meaning. And we've noticed with a collective crisis, there's a disconnection from our own body, from other people, from the land, from our traditions like religion, disconnection from nature and the environment. So this is what some people refer to as the polycrisis. So if it's disconnection that gives us a collapse of meaning, the antidote is reconnection. Simple as that. And yet it's very difficult to do that. As Jen mentioned, it's our narratives that hold meaning for us. The cultural collective holds the meaning as well as the individual. So those are big words. What does that mean? It means that previously meaning was held in religion for many, many people. That has collapsed from the advent of science and noticing facts that didn't correlate with our previous meaning. It's also held in the arts. The arts generate meaning, whereas things like philosophy try to deconstruct meaning. So there's this interplay between the different disciplines, and that's why the arts are so important. The books, the narratives, the art, the dance, the ritual, the things that give us meaning as a collective have been so devalued and diminished by capitalism that they're kind of a bit lost right now. So of course, meaning is going to look like it doesn't exist. So the generators of meaning are trying to make a living because mortgages are high. Things like that. It's a collective interdependence that we make meaning within ourselves on the small scale. We make meaning in our community, from where we belong, the land. We make meaning as a nation. Now the challenge is, how do we make global meaning? Shared narratives of value. That's the next metamodern move. So we can no longer just make meaning on the local scale, because it's so different from meaning in the East or in India or in the UK or Africa. We now have to build narratives of meaning that include us all. That's the next move. That's what's actually being deconstructed are the small narratives of meaning. I'm a Christian. I'm not, I'm just saying, I'm a Taoist. But if I'm a Christian, I'm not going to agree to the meaning you have as a Muslim. Different sets of meanings. So the call now is, how do we build a narrative of meaning that includes everybody's value? Because that's the next thing we have to buy into, is the bigger picture. So that's what's happening. Little narratives are being deconstructed, and a big narrative that includes us all is going to emerge. And that is really exciting. So as Jen mentioned, there's been a devaluing of the subjective and a overvaluing of the objective. That's what happened in modernity. We developed science, which destroyed our previous narratives, and science became the way we became more and more objective and started disconnecting and looking at the world as opposed to feeling and imagining. Now, this is my place right now to mention Dr. Iain McGilchrist, who's written whole books on this. His whole life has been devoted to how we revalue the right brain. This is the answer to connection. We said disconnection has been created by hyper-objectivity. The left brain became so overvalued, cut our world into little parts, and we divorced ourselves from it, and we lost connection. That's what happened during modernity. It's the relic of patriarchy and all sorts of things. We've mentioned that. I'm going to refer to that as hyper yang as opposed to healthy yang. We turned the world into an object that we can use as a resource and destroy, and it's destroying us. So how do we reconnect? Dr. McGilchrist would say we have to value the right brain again. So that's the arts, intuition, imagination, what I refer to as yin, anything yin or the feminine, which has been destroyed by hyper yang. Healthy yang starts to include the yin, and healthy yin starts to include the yang. So that is the object-subject split that we've referred to. Please, as Jane said, look at that episode again. How we have to now reconnect is bring the masculine and feminine together and value them both for their specialties. We have to integrate the left and right hemisphere. We have to reintegrate with other cultures. We have to reintegrate our narratives and our values across the planet. So this is the move. We deconstruct what didn't work, which leaves us feeling like we've got a little bit of a meaning crisis. And now the work is to reconstruct value for everybody. So is the value inside us? Is it subjective? Is it the things that give us pleasure, our needs and our desires? Yes. Is it outside of us in the universe? Does the cosmos have intrinsic value that we need to detect? Yes. The objective and the subjective ways of finding meaning are both needing to be integrated. The internal meaning of the body, which is usually about finding pleasure and what gives us meaning, and the external, what is meaningful for everybody, what is meaningful for the planet. That's the objective values of a cosmos that works for everybody. That is the individual and the collective. Healing the subjective and objective split is the way to go. Back to you, dear Jen. Love to hear what you have to say.
Yes, what is meaningful for all? What an interesting question to present those of us who are super saturated in the old reductionist binary thinking of individualism, right? It's such a mind trip to really start to consider other beings, other people, other places within our meaning making algorithms in our mind, and it so opens your heart up to our deep interconnections with each other, and why it's so important to heal this split that we are talking about. Yeah, thank you for that. We've talked about how we're making meaning on a personal level, so now we're looking at how we're making meaning together. And because collectively we are making meaning together all the time, and that's basically how we evolve as a society. It's a set of agreements that are, in a way, very much alive and constantly growing and changing through our agreed upon and shared meanings that we exchange with each other. So as a society, we're creating meaning together, and that helps us feel connected, and it helps us connect with others who share our values and our ideals. And meaning is also how we learn and unlearn from each other. We if we have something that we're passionate about and we're spreading awareness about it, that we want to infuse meaning into our message, because we want somebody to hear us, right? Because it means something to us, so we're sharing that meaning. And then we find our tribes of community and our creative communities, and then we imbue meaning into our creative expressions. So we're constantly creating meaning together. We find meaning in being in service to each other, in taking positions of leadership. There's meaning. You know, like I mentioned before, when we have shared meetings, that's how we find our people, because you're in the world and you meet somebody at the bus stop and you start talking and you realize you have something really important that you both care about together, and suddenly you're bonded with this person, this stranger, and because you share a meaning, something you both really care about. Maybe it's just building model airplanes, right? But the meaning is strong, and instantly strangers go to friends because the meaning is strong. So yeah, another thing that I think is really important as we consider collective meaning making is that we find a lot of ways to make meaning together on an ecological level. And this is a really important part of healing and addressing the alienation and disconnect that we feel as a species from our animal kinfolk. Our capacity to understand how we make meaning is vital to having a conscious relationship with our living planet. And we can't address that alienation and disconnect we feel without really looking and examining how we make meaning, and why certain things mean more than other things, why certain species mean more than other species. That's a really important inquiry. So yeah, because we've never really been separate from nature, ever. Those of us who've been really raised in this reductionist mindset have been told that we are perpetually disconnected from nature, but we have never been disconnected. And how we create meaning reflects that disconnect, right? So in this time of great transformation, what Joanna Macy, our beloved teacher Joanna Macy, calls the great turning, one way that we can reconnect ourselves within the great sphere of our living planet is to create new meaning in and with nature. So in the next section, we're going to talk about how the personal and the collective come together to create a new kind of harmony and synthesis and reimagination between our natural gift for internal meaning making and our natural proclivity for external meaning making. So I'm going to pass it back to you, Sally.
Thanks, Jen. So yeah, I want to take up on what you said. How do we synthesize this polarity? Let's look briefly where it might have arisen on the plains of the savannah. So, for example, men were always scanning the horizon, looking for danger and looking for food, meat, hunting. So their focus tended to move more towards the left brain and focus on the external. Great problem solvers, deeply grateful. Humanity would not have survived without men specializing in the focus on the external world. So what was happening in the cave? Women's focus was evolving domestically. We were noticing needs, desires, wants, and taking care of young life and old life in the cave. So we became community orientated, relational, as opposed to hyper agentic. So these two gifts generally split between men and women, but not always, because we have all those qualities. Generally split between left and right brain, but we have all those qualities. We specialized in our early days, and that's how we survived as a species. The call now is to bring these together, to bring the agentic, hyper-individual, competitive, healthy aggression together with the more communal, the more relational, the more internal. External and internal now need to marry. And we don't see ourselves as separating the two. We now see ourselves as a field of intelligence in which we move and in which we co-create. This is a massive shift of meaning from being a separate individual to being part of a collective. This is what's happening globally right now. So we're understanding that, okay, our old idea of God, a white man with a beard in the sky, may have died. But there's something amazing that's emerging. This field of intelligence in which we move. God moved from outside to the inside. That is a remarkable shift. So some people have called it the hyper object. I would call it the hyper subject as well. It's both. It's a hyper field, and we're a fractal. That changes everything. No wonder we're having a meaning collapse, because a new one is emerging. The new meaning has to find space. And we need to integrate our own brain to receive that new level of consciousness. It's happening internally as well as externally at the same time. So the humanity, the shift in consciousness, which Vervaeke marked the provenance of that. I'm going to take that further and call that integral Taoism. The shift in consciousness is the merging of the masculine and feminine, the left and right brain, the internal, the external, and noticing that it's a field of constant change. We had philosophers in the Greek times, Parmenides, who said life is changeless. We had Heraclitus, who said life is constant change. These are the polarities we're now bringing together. What are the permanent, changeless values that give us meaning? And what are the changing values that we need to update? How do we bring meaning together from this polarity? All the philosophers have either focused on subjective meaning, pleasure, needs, or objective meaning. There's something in the universe, truth, beauty, goodness, that is changeless. Both are true but partial. We're bringing these together now. So I'm just going to notice briefly the different ideas of meaning. For example, when Nietzsche said God had given us meaning, but now he's dead. Sigmund Freud said life is a quest for pleasure. Notice the subjective and objective here. Alfred Adler said life is a quest for power. Viktor Frankl said life is a quest for meaning. John Dewey said life is a quest for self-inquiry, participation in education, learning. Thomas Jefferson said life is about finding the pursuit of happiness and democracy. So we've had all these ideas of what life means. Some are subjective, some are objective. Then Hegel came along. I'm going to be brief, but mention Hegel. Hegel said, oh, we have a thesis and an antithesis, a polarity. We now need to integrate these into a higher synthesis. It's called the dialectic. Watch a program if you want to go further on how Hegel obviously says, bring these two together. Iain McGilchrist is saying, bring these two together. So this is the next shift in consciousness. We bring the yin and the yang together into a marriage, internally and externally. Part of the meaning collapse is the gender wars. We need to reframe our meanings, our roles, our values, our contributions, and open that up to a whole new engagement with evolution, despite race, gender, age, all the things that have separated us from hierarchies. So I would like to just end on a note that really honors this legacy of trying to name what is meaningful, as well as just notice that this is a process of emergence. And what is happening as meaning emerges, it gets a larger and larger perspective. Starts off being multi-perspectival, bit of conflict, whose perspective is right. Then we synthesize and we get this larger narrative, which is evolution, by the way. And Jen and I have been talking about that the whole time. That there's a move afoot with human consciousness as it complexifies and can take in more and more diversity and include the other, the opposite. We're integrating polarity. So back to you, Jen. What an amazing topic. Gonna hand it back to you and for your conclusions.
Ooh, integrating polarities. Yes, the new meaning has to find space. Exactly. I mean, yeah, there's something so fruitful about this breakdown that we're experiencing, and it is that new meanings are arising that we can't even conceive of. And how beautiful. What an amazing journey. What a great time to be alive. I think our capacity for meaning making is really magical and miraculous. And even more curious is the third magical thing that arises when the internal meaning making and the external meaning making are come together. And so our internal world and our external world are operating in harmony. So when they're consciously experienced and honored simultaneously, then I'm making meaning internally, and I'm simultaneously aware that meaning is happening externally, and there isn't any tension between the two. It's just a steady flow of information that I am interpreting into ever-changing fluid meanings. I'm not holding on to any particular meaning because I know it's going to be ever-changing, right? So I'm holding meanings lightly enough to let them go as new meanings arise. And that is definitely part of the new flex of conscious living. So, and it's here in this third space of opportunity that I think we have the best chance for creating real and radical change that we need to make as a species in order to keep our place here on this planet. Because we need both internal changes and we need external changes. We need shifts in meaning internally and externally in order to kind of make the differences that we need to make. Because we can't deal with a very complex many systems crisis with the reductionist and binary thinking that got us into this predicament to begin with, right? So the solutions are found in the things we talk about all the time on this podcast, which are complexity, paradox, nuance. These are the hallmarks, as we say all the time, of conscious living. So the more comfortable we can be operating on many levels at once, making meaning internally and externally, the more we can open ourselves up to those solutions that we need in order to deal with the problems that we face. So meaning is always going to be a both and project. We're making meaning on the inside and we're creating meaning on the outside. And when those two things come together, healing happens. That's how we evolve as a species. That's what Sally and I feel like we are being called to do right now. And that's one of the main messages of this podcast, is that we can reimagine and recreate not only who we are in our sense of identity and self, but we can really recreate our literal minds and hearts and spirits. We can rewire and ourselves and access this deep wisdom that is alive within us, the kind of deep wisdom that we need in order to survive in these chaotic times. And this, I think, is where meaning and transformation really intersect. This is where they come together, because life is going to happen. Good things are going to unfold and bad things are going to unfold, but we always have the power and potential to give those things meaning and transform them into something of value. And that is a profound transformative opportunity that we all have every single day. And that is a gift that we can access every single day. And more than anything, what we need right now are good tools in our toolbox that allow us to get through day to day in this time of so much rapid change. So we want to encourage you to go back and check out previous episodes where you can pick up some tools for your toolbox if you haven't already done that. And I want to say thank you. And I look forward to being with you again next time on the Radical Emergence podcast. And I'm going to pass it back to Sally to take us out for this episode.
So amazing, Jen, how you tracked how things that we used to believe have to dissolve to allow space for new emergence, new meaning. So let's look at that, for example, how we identify with certain beliefs that are now defunct, because that's all that's happening now, is those are disintegrating. Centering humanity at the center of ecology, defunct. We can't survive without the entire system. Centering the Western world at the center of the universe, defunct. India and China and other countries are on the rise and demanding we notice them. We are equal. Centering man at the center of the universe and his left brain, specialty, defunct. We're all here, we're all creative, we're all valuable. Centering whiteness, centering all the things that we used to believe, that's dissolving. Of course, it's disorientating. So those are identities that we were fixed with in a hierarchy. So what's really happening now in a postmodern world is we're noticing everybody has value. How do we work with that? How do we create new meaning for everybody that works? Very disorientating, and a lot of people are holding on to the past. It was their security blanket. And, you know, systems like religion upheld those beliefs. And of course, that God died. And then science showed us a new God, the God of evolution, of systems thinking, of a cosmos that is alive and quantumly energetic and intelligent. That changes everything. It's going to take time to integrate, to let go of the old, bring in the biggest, widest perspective that we have that is meaningful for everybody. That'll take time. It's going to be a bumpy ride, but it's so exciting. And we get to co-create that. And that's exactly what Jen and I are doing. And we're inviting all of you to feel the same level of excitement. We get to co-create and engage and participate in this fractal evolving universe. I feel the responsibility of that, and the joy and the pride and the excitement, all the things. It's internal and external. So until next time, episode 16, where we look at how our consciousness develops over time in order to actually manage that. Because little babies can't manage what we've been speaking about. Teenagers can't manage what we've been speaking about. It takes a level of maturity and development, adult development, to actually have the capacity to take this in. So episode 16 will be about developmental frameworks that allow us to grasp reality. So until then, we love you and thank you so much for your supportive feedback. And anytime you want to drop us a note, please do. You can find us on radical-emergence.org and track us on YouTube, on any podcast platform. You can hear the audio, and we're excited to be doing this. Thank you for joining us. Till next time. So thanks for joining us. And we hope you can take away some helpful tools, perhaps some great stories, and some wisdom for your own ongoing journey.
Join us for our next episode, where we will deep dive again into a universe of transformation.